you have written that this election will be a referendum on electricity and renewable energy. But as we just saw in that story, some voters are quite pleased with the direction that Port Augusta is taking with green energy. But you think that the policy in place by the incumbent government is madness. Why?
Well, if we take a statewide perspective, what we know is that prices over this last summer in South Australia were around 260% higher than just 4 summers ago. And they're 90% higher than what's the case in New South Wales, 20% higher in Victoria. So rising energy prices are really hurting households, but what they're also doing is they're driving businesses away to the eastern seaboard. Business investment has declined by about 30% over the past year in South Australia. It's got a high unemployment rate and young people are fleeing the state for better prospects on the eastern seaboard. Now, one of the key reasons for this is the renewable energy target in South Australia, because what it does is it provides subsidies and other forms of government favouritism to bring wind onto market before it's actually able to properly displace and replace the baseload power that's there from coal. So what we know is that renewable energy is much more expensive than coal, because if it weren't, then there would be no need for the $60 billion in forecast subsidies that it's going to be receiving. We know it's less reliable than coal because wind can only go at about 30% capacity, whereas coal goes at about 75% capacity. And we also know that wind is not able to cope with those periods of high demand. We saw, for example, earlier in this year, in January, when both South Australia and Victoria had temperatures in the 40s, wind was only providing 3.5% of total energy generation around the country. It simply cannot cope with these high temperatures, and it cannot replace coal as a reliable and affordable form of baseload power. And that's why it's so important that governments are technologically neutral. It's not about being anti-renewables or pro-coal or anti-coal and pro-renewables. It's about ensuring that governments are implementing policy such that the market is responding to whatever the demands and the preferences are of business and consumers, and that's just not happening at the moment.
But it's being pushed back by groups like the IPA and by the federal government, and I think we just need to call them out on that.
Daniel, let's give you a right of reply before we move on to another issue on the South Australian election.
Sure. I mean, there's only 2 things you need to think about when it comes to renewables. Firstly, if renewables are so much more cost-effective than coal and gas, then why do we need to be subsidising renewables? Why are we subsidising renewables to the tune of $60 billion over the period to 2030?
Well, why do we
Secondly,
need to be subsidising coal?
if we have renewables that are so reliable, then why does South Australia have an interconnector with Victoria that allows South Australia to import brown coal energy generation from Victoria 60% of the time?
Because we have a national electricity market. We have interconnection between all the states.
The whole idea of renewables in South Australia, the claims being made is that you don't need to have reliance on coal anymore. Then stop importing coal from Victoria. Stand on your own 2 feet.
But we're in the midst
remove
of
the subsidies for renewables. And what we know is that South Australia imports energy from Victoria 60% of the time. So renewables are not more cost effective, they're not more reliable. Now, it may well be the case that in 20, 30, 40 years' time they are, and fine. I think there should be total government neutrality in this. There shouldn't be subsidies for coal, gas or renewables. What the energy generators should be doing is simply responding to the preferences of consumers and businesses. Now, if they want to have high-cost unreliable renewables, then they're free to access that. If they want low-cost reliable coal, they're also free to access that.
I thought that IPA was the voice for business, and it seems surprising to me that South Australia is attracting 2 of the foremost forward-thinking billionaires from around the world, Sanjeev Gupta from the UK and Elon Musk, who are coming to South Australia because of its renewable policies. In fact, Sanjeev Gupta says that the only reason that...
The IPA is not a voice for business. The IPA is a voice for freedom and for free markets. We're not corporatists. We don't want subsidies. The renewable energy lobbyists are the corporatists. They're providing a smokescreen for subsidies to go from hard-working Australians and to put them across to big corporations and businesses. We want the free and fair operation of the market. And whether that's 20% renewables, 40, 60, 10, it doesn't matter. It should be up to the free market and free people in a free society.